Welcome to Season 7 of the Prima Donna podcast, Sonic Portraits of Australian Artists. This audio was recorded and produced on Wurundjeri country, where I pay respects to elders past and present. To find out more about the project and to hear more episodes like this one, visit primadonnapodcast.com. The second episode in this series features a posthumous portrait of jazz drummer and band leader Alma Quon. Born in 1911 in Bendigo, Alma was one of 7 children, with all the girls in the family taking music lessons from a young age. She moved to Melbourne in the 1930s and performed in the all-woman jazz band The Merrymakers with her sister Lorna. The Quon sisters played with the Merrymakers up until the Second World War. In 1941, Alma formed her own band, the Joybelles, a group of women from mixed cultural backgrounds also featuring Lorna. With Alma on drums, the Joybelles played for several years at dances and functions in and around Melbourne and were still performing up until the 1990s. In 1995, an exhibition at the Performing Arts Museum titled Sweethearts of Melbourne paid homage to bands such as the Merrymakers and Alma Quon and her Joybelles. Alma and Lorna's Chinese ancestry was referenced with Chinese-style lettering on the drum kit, and their musical set occasionally included a popular Chinese song played on Western instruments. Alma gave dance lessons to children at state primary schools all across Victoria and was known for her hard work, focus, and no-nonsense approach to both teaching and performing. She passed away at the age of 96. I was fortunate in preparation for this episode to record a conversation with Alma's nephew, Ray Quon, from the Australian rock band The Blue Echoes. Ray has many fond memories of growing up at Alma's gigs and the special connection they had thanks to their shared love of music. All the drumming in this episode was performed and recorded by Luke Yong.
Yes, I really appreciate the past, especially when there's a bit of history and people of, are very, like yourself, are very interested in all of this. And but it wasn't until she passed away that the real interest came out. She initiated, I think she wasn't a follower, except that wasn't her band. I think after that, then she formed her own band. And because she realised that the war was going to go on, I think. That's the way I think that she would have thought, that the war was going to go on for a while. So I think I'll get in on the ground floor. She got taught up at the convent up there at Rutherglen, and then she came down, and I think that she, I don't think she went and had lessons at all, but there was another sister called Amy who lived in New South Wales. She was probably the best piano player. She was the best one of the lot. She used to come down from Sydney and they used to play for us duos and all the rest of it. To my knowledge, she didn't get taught. She wasn't taught anymore. She just learned it herself. Alma, I was always on we were on the same level. For example, we'd go over and see her, and I'm this high, 10 or 11. She had no time for my other members of the family, even her own brother and my younger sister, because they didn't play music. So she used to usher them out the back, and she used to talk to me like, come on, Raymond. She said, we'll go and talk some music. The others can amuse themselves in the back room reading some magazines, And so we'd sit down and we'd talk for ages and ages on music. She was interested in what I was doing, and of course I was interested in what she was doing. And it got to one stage when our band, the Echoes, were very popular. We were on radio, we were on TV, you name it. And she rang me up. And whenever she rang me up, I knew that there was something happening. So I'd drive over to her place. She lived in Kew, lived there for years. And she'd call me in, sit me down like we're doing, and she'd say, now, Raymond, I need some information from you. She says, we're not getting the work that we used to. And they were in their 70s then, and let's face it, they'd probably seen better days as the band. A lot of them had passed away. She said, I need to get into this music that you're doing, this rock and roll music. And I said, oh, okay. She said, and I'll do a deal with you. And she was a very astute businesswoman. She says, I'll teach you how to do all the proper intros and dance tempos, which came in handy to me later on when I was doing the old time dances, like the modern waltzes, dun, 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 all the 6/8, and he had to be right, spot on. So she taught me those, and I taught her how to rock and roll, and she was so grateful, and I was so grateful too. So we had that type of relationship, and then she said, I'd like you to take over the band. And I said, well, it was a bit of an awkward situation. She said, well, you're the only one with the Quon name. She said, no one else can. She said, and I wanted to go on. So anyway, she sort of memory started to go at that stage, so it never eventuated. Well, she learnt piano, and the two girls, that's Lorna and Alma, Iris wasn't born at that time, they lived at Rutherglen, and their mum and dad, my grandparents, they came out from, or my grandfather did, from China, and they set up a general store in Rutherglen. They had that for years, and there were 7 kids. They got taught the music at a convent up there. And then when they came down to Melbourne, I think Alma then sought to learn the drums. And that's what she played at these big teaching the kids at school. She would play the drums, and because she was out there in front of the kids. And she'd also play piano sometimes. But, there's something up to about 800 kids at these schools. And I went out and saw them because I was one of those kids that got taught too at school. We all did, all the kids. But anyway, I went out to see her, and just to give you an example of where she was at, if one of the kids started crying, 7 or 8 year old kids, the normal mother, female, would say, "Now don't cry, you'll be right. What's wrong? Do you want a hanky there?" But not Alma. Kids say, "She's crying, please can we replace her?" And it was, even then I realised it was so embarrassing, but the show must go on. Yeah. I think that her work escalated when the Second World War came along, because all the guys went overseas. The only bands there really was Alma's band plus a couple of the others. So they got a heap of work. And I remember that when I was very small, in the early 50s. I can remember, my dad saying, well, Alma's, the band are doing a lot of work. It was when the guys came back from the Second World War, they were one of the few female bands that kept going. A lot of them just fell by the wayside because she was a professional. That was her, income, and she was right into it. And they did all the mural balls. That one there was taken, I think it was at Myer, what they called, before my time, Myer Music Hall. That's where all the big functions, was probably like the equivalent of the Arts Centre, I suppose, now. So they used to do all those big private functions. They didn't record, unfortunately, to my knowledge. I've got no recordings of them, even at home here, playing music, which is a shame. They all could read music, they were all good. They didn't tour like overseas or anything like that, but there was just so much work, especially during the war years and everything. That's where they made their mark. And I used to look forward to going in on the train with my mother. And Alma played at a place called the Gay Paris, which was a French orientated eating place with a spiral staircase that used to go down, and Alma could see me coming down. She'd say over the microphone, "Now my nephew Raymond is coming down." Didn't mention my mum. And if he's in a good mood, I might get him to play piano. And I freaked out because I was learning classical. And when you're learning classical, you know, your repertoire is very minimal. So, but anyway, she knew what she was doing, and that sort of made me comfortable in front of strangers from about 18 years of age. That would have been in the mid 50s. When I was a bit older, I used to have functions, big functions that they'd play at once a year. Being of Chinese extract, we used to have there was an organisation called the YCL, which is the Young Chinese League, and all Chinese used to go there. And Alma had the band, like that with the yellow outfits, and they'd play there. And she'd get me up to sing. And also she used to play at the Cheltenham Repat Hospital. I think that's what it was called. It was a hospital for all the returned soldiers from the Second World War. Huge place on the corner of Warrigal and Kingston Road in Cheltenham. And, be lots and lots of people there. And there was quite a few private functions. And occasionally she used to ring me up, and not me, but my parents, and say, "Look, I think you should take Raymond to this job that I'm doing." She said, "I think he'd be very interested in it." And they might have played a little bit of rock and roll, something. So that was good. My auntie on the violin was an exceptionally good player, and she played at a couple of the festival hall shows that came out, because when she passed away, I found a couple of programs in the case, which are worth a bit of money now. When Bill Haley came out, her name is Lorna. Lorna played violin, yeah. No, well, they're all passed away to my knowledge now, but the trumpet player in the band, Moya Brown, has her name come up there? Yes, well, she ended up buying Alma's home. When I was very small, she lived in O'Shanassy Street, Kew, and then Alma moved over to Henry Street, Kew, which was just over the road, big house. And Moya Brown, I think I'm correct, bought Alma's place in O'Shanassy Street, and she used to, her and her husband had a circus act. and in O'Shanassy Street, she used to have monkeys there on the premises, cages and everything. I used to love going over there. So she was a bit of a character.
So Alma was married, but didn't
Yes.
have any children.
Yeah, and Lorna was married also and never had any children.
Yeah. And were their husbands supportive of their musical?
Supportive, but not involved. Probably the only involvement would be that Lorna never drove anywhere, so her husband Glenn would take her some. Or I think in the early days they used to catch public transport, and I can remember my dad saying, and I said to my dad's got two brothers, and the last one just passed away a couple of years ago at 101, Dennis. Because I remember saying to my dad, I said, because my dad loved music, on this piano too, the same piano. I got this in 1950 something, and Mum and Dad bought it for me, and I've always kept it, But I said, Dad, why didn't you get taught music? And he said that none of the boys got taught music because Mum and Dad couldn't afford it, and their parents wanted the girls to get a good grounding, which they did, but all the boys did was help them get on the tram and bus and accompany them on public transport. And my dad was really he really would have loved to have learnt music. So that's why they insisted that I and Alma was very, Raymond must be taught music. And there's a picture, I think, in there of all the family, and it shows the boys, that's Alma's brother and son playing the saxophone. They taught themselves a little bit, yeah, but they never had formal lessons. Yeah. And I was a pretty good golfer when I was about 13. I schoolboy runner-up golf champion, Victorian schoolboy, and found out that was in 1960 that my dad didn't have long to live, so Alma lined me up a job, and I had a job offered to me in the golf club as a young kid, learning all the ropes. And Alma said, "No, Raymond will make more money playing music than he will playing golf." Now, initially, she was right, but the golfers now, they earn much more than most musicians.
You've been listening to the Prima Donna podcast. I would like to thank Ray Quon, Kay Dreyfus, Claudia Funder, and Luke Yong for their help with research and preparation for this episode. To find out more about the project and to hear more episodes like this one, visit primadonnapodcast.com.